Excellent. So we probably will get started about now. I think we've got Mariana Mazzucato, Professor Mariana Mazzucato here with us just for the first part of the call, which is a real treat. And we've invited her to speak with all of you about why she set up IIPP, what inspired and motivated this, and why having a Master's of Public Administration program is so integral to what the Institute does, and the work that we care about. So I'm happy to hand it over to Mariana to talk a little bit about this, and then ideally to take some questions from you all before she needs to step off the call, and then Carolina and I will take over. But Mariana, I'm very happy to hand over you. Thank you so much.
Great. Well, thanks so much. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I tried to share, but I see just a blank screen. Kate, is anything sharing?
I'm not seeing it. Let me
Okay.
share from my side.
Okay, great. Thank you. So first of all, it's a huge treat to speak to you. We are obviously here to entice you to the Institute, and I wanted to tell you a bit about why I set it up back in 2017. So I had been writing books like The Entrepreneurial State since 2013, and that idea, that real kind of change in narrative that was accompanied, well, that it accompanied, I think was really catching on. It came out, one could say, at the right time. But I was starting to get increasingly frustrated that I was finding myself just talking about a book and then flying off without actually going into what it means for the complete change in how we govern the global capitalist system. And in that sense, how we govern public institutions, how we govern private institutions, and especially how they work together to solve big problems. And I was convinced we actually need a completely different way of thinking and new training, really, within the civil service, but also within any organization that is interested in facing the problems of our time and really thinking about what it means to partner well. What is a symbiotic partnership versus for example, a parasitic partnership between different actors? And what the Institute does is it really kind of puts that idea of purpose, public purpose and missions, directed growth, market shaping, not market fixing, at the center of economic theory, of policy and practice, but also the training. And the links between those three areas, kind of new economic thinking, so that's the research, policy and practice, and the training, we call this practice-based theorizing. So again, we might all write great books, and as Kate mentioned, Carolina has just written a fantastic book. Cecilia is also, Recap is writing a great book on basically the huge problem that we have today with big tech and the monopolistic power. Reiner's written a great book on creative bureaucracies. Kate's doing amazing work on systems thinking. David Eves is doing great work on digital public infrastructure. But what does it mean to bring that work to the ground, test it out around the world, and bring the learning on the ground when we open the can of worms of actually trying to do difficult things to the theory itself, but also to the training. And again, the link between those three, Kate, if you can move to the four buckets there. Sorry, for some reason I couldn't share my screen. We call that practice-based theorizing. Here we go, right here. And maybe actually go to the previous one. That, as I mentioned before, really needs to also be accompanied with a completely different story and narrative, right? We're not fixing markets, which is how economists think about the role of policy. You almost have to wait for a failure or a gap. Think of the word financial gap to arise before we do anything, towards something much more proactive, co-creating and shaping markets. What does that look like, both in terms of the theory and the practice? What does it look like in terms of the design of an institution, like a public bank, or a tool like public sector procurement? And the narrative shift away from just one side de-risking the other, enabling the other, facilitating the other, towards actually really sharing the risks, welcoming the underlying uncertainty. And in doing so, almost even being proud when some mistakes happen, instead of feeling so risk averse that then you need some consultants to come in to rubber stamp things because you're worried that if you kind of trip and fall, you'll get blamed, right? So that idea that venture capitalists often admit is central to innovation, which for every success, you're gonna have to bear with quite a few failures, trial and error, experimentation, and so on. We don't really have that within government. So there's a lot of work we do around that, around creative bureaucracies. We think about setting up gov labs, like in Chile, Laboratorio de Gobierno, and again, welcoming the underlying uncertainty in working together with different types of partners on areas, whether it's the moon landing or making sure that every child on Earth has access to healthy, sustainable, tasty school meals. Again, these are really difficult challenges, but it requires different governance structures. Kate, maybe you can go to the books. So again, we have an amazing set of faculty that we brought in. Here's just some examples of some of the books that have come out recently, including Josh Ryan Collins's great work on the housing crisis, but also how we can't just keep producing finance to buy homes if we don't also increase the real wages, and why the link between the real economy and the financial economy are so central. Otherwise, we end up with these financial crises. But also this idea of innovative bureaucracies, creative bureaucracies, that Rainer Cattell has written about. Carlota Perez from Venezuela is one of our star faculty members who's written about the 300 years of capitalist history and how technology, the state, and finance co-evolve. Hilary Cottam, one of our faculty members, has talked about cutting-edge new theory around the welfare state, how to make it much more relational, so we're not kind of doing things at people, but with them. In fact, we implemented some of that thinking in Camden, where we, through the Institute's kind of more practical work that I'll get to in a minute, but in Camden, the ideas of Hilary Cottam were quite important because we brought, for example, in the mission-oriented design in Camden for adult social care, the first thing was to say, well, who's going to design that? Surely the people who have experience both giving the care and receiving the care should be at the table in that co-creation and co-design process. And that idea of a relational welfare state where it's done with people, not at people, is something I think really, really interesting in Hilary's work. Moving on, the next slide. Probably the most exciting, oops, oh, it doesn't include the one that I thought we had added in, sorry. So you can just stay back on the books if you want. The reason that MPA is so innovative is that we've done so much work globally. Recently in Brazil, we worked with the government for 3 years trying to implement some of these ideas on the ground, working with them, not at them. In fact, some of the best workshops we had over 50 people from the government working with us on this idea of missions and mission-oriented procurement. And they were meeting each other for the first time because the whole point of missions is to work in an interdepartmental way, right? Because climate change isn't just for the Department of Energy. Health and well-being is not just for the Department of Health. So that idea of getting people from different departments in government thinking together about their own national challenges, but again, what it meant for that redesign of the tools on the ground. The work in Brazil finished with this report that we wrote, which is now also being implemented, thinking about what the implications are for mission-oriented policy for procurement, digital public infrastructure, and state-owned enterprises. Similarly, in Barbados, we worked for 2.5 years and even had some of our own staff on secondment there, working closely with Mia Mottley, the Prime Minister, and her team. And some of the most interesting things there was really the idea of genuine, not tokenistic, citizen engagement, and this idea of a social partnership between business, labor, and government, setting their own missions around the blue and the green economy together. Work in South Africa was very interesting in terms of the idea of state-owned enterprises often being part of the problem. So when you have clunky and bureaucratic state-owned enterprises that are also not aligned to national priorities, and I've experienced this also in Italy, where I'm from, they do become a bottleneck. And even though we believe in, public banks and different forms of public ownership, that shouldn't be seen as a panacea unless, again, we also ask ourselves, what does it mean in terms of outcomes orientation and market shaping to have dynamic, agile, flexible institutions that work together in a portfolio kind of approach to help to tilt the playing field in a country with a direction towards more inclusive and sustainable growth. And I would argue actually that in South Africa, the most interesting work was in fact thinking how to align these public entities, which often are not aligned. Anyway, today, by the way, the reason I'm unfortunately going to have to jump off the call is that we also have a workshop with the UK government thinking about GB Energy, this new state-owned enterprise around energy, but also the National Wealth Fund, because the government here has taken on some of our ideas. We're a bit critical of how they've done it, but that idea of being a critical friend, running workshops both in the Institute, bringing some of our students who this year are in our existing cohort to also participate in some of these roundtables, but always with the ambition of not kind of speaking at people, but learning also from their own experience and bringing the lessons to the training. And so Kate and Carolina will talk more, I'm sure, about the curriculum, but I just wanted to give you that flavor that we really believe that we need that new mindset to rethink the state, to rethink the relationship between the state, business, labor, and citizens in this outcomes-oriented, market-shaping way. And that the best thing I think about being part of the Institute is that we're constantly trying to put these ideas into practice. And it's interesting to look at some of the evolution of our own students and going through the one-year MPA, being placed in the third term, which again, I'm sure Kate will talk about, in some of these organizations we work with globally. And then once the MPA was over, working with us, like in the case of Luca, working with us in a particular country where we've been trying to implement the ideas, and ultimately sometimes being hired by those organizations. Like in the case of Dan Wainwright, one of our students who worked with us in Camden is now hired by Camden Council to be in charge of public sector reform. So that idea, again, of bringing our students to this kind of exciting process of practice-based theorizing is, I think, why it's really cool to come to the Institute. Thank you.
Mariana, we have a really nice question that just popped up in the chat about, are there opportunities for students to get involved in these types of projects? I'd hope you'd speak to that and maybe some of your experience of working with MPAs while they're students and potentially also once they graduate.
Sure. I mean, literally just in my office where I am now, 10 minutes ago, there were some students here who are helping us with the UK work. We had a workshop last week on the public value of arts and culture, where we had a bunch of artists and also museum heads, but also people in the Treasury and in the Department for Culture, Medium, and Sports there. And again, our students from this year's cohort, quite a few of them interested in that work, were present. So sometimes it's just literally opening the door to allow them to be like flies on the wall. Other times, again, every year we've done this, we hire them during the time that they are studying, and they are paid kind of on an hourly basis. There's only so many hours that students have that they can actually work if they're studying. And so in that case, they're just supporting work with any extra time that they have, especially if they want to earn some extra money. But the most exciting is when job positions actually come out, whether it's to be a research assistant or more regularly different forms of policy fellowships and practitioner kind of roles, where we hire people either for 6 months or a year or 2 years or 3 years to accompany us with the work in some countries. So in the case, as I mentioned, of Dan Wainwright, he worked with us for 2 years in Camden. Luca, who I also mentioned, worked with us for 3 years in Barbados. We have Priya, who's currently working with us both on a new project starting up in Malaysia, but also again with the UK work. We have Manuel Maldonado from Peru, who's currently working with us in a form of coordinating some of the work we're doing, both at the country level, also with some of the applied learning that we do, which is 4-week training programs with governments. He's helping to coordinate that in particular countries, like in Peru. But also, literally today, he was in my office because he's coming with us to COP in Belém, in Brazil. We're leaving on Monday, where we're launching 2 reports. And Manuel has not only helped to coordinate that trip, but also he will be with us on site.
I welcome other questions for Mariana. Please pop them into the chat or particularly into the Q&A box. Let's see. While we wait for a few more questions to come in, Maria, do you want to speak to the question of sort of what makes an MPA at IIPP different to maybe an MPA or an MPP at another university?
Well, first of all, if you actually move away from this market fixing to market shaping, that also requires a completely different theory of value. So value as co-created, value created collectively. It's not that just, value is not just created in the private sector and then redistributed or fixed along the way to make sure that bads don't happen. So that really is the first place where we begin the MPA, which is, well, what's a new thinking about value? Instead of assuming that this is really just about policy, what is a new theory of value that needs to underpin that? What is a new idea in terms of public purpose, purpose-oriented economy? How is that different from an economy where we assume there is no direction, but we're just kind of allowing the market system to flourish, and then again, we correct things on the side? What is a theory of creative bureaucracies, which I mentioned that we talk a lot about? So I would say the 4 key pillars in the MPA really are about value, public purpose, creative bureaucracies, systems thinking, but also that idea of constant agency. We have agency. A lot of the problems that we face are not due to deterministic forces, but results of choices we've made. So in terms of design thinking, and bringing that agency back also when we're thinking about digital platforms, that's really, I think, important area. In fact, there's a whole module around design and digital transformation. And so I think what makes it different is we don't take the existing curriculum that's out there, but we've literally rewritten it in light of this idea of challenge and outcomes and mission orientation and the entrepreneurial state. And it's not surprising that MBA programs, Masters in Business Administration programs, have all these sexy titles like decision sciences, organizational behavior, strategic management, because we have a theory of value for the private sector. And any manager is going to have to rethink his or her organization if it gets big and clunky. The whole theory of the multi-divisional company in General Motors and so on back in the day came about because companies were seeing that they were becoming too vertical and inertial. Whereas with bureaucracies, we all just roll our eyes and say, Kafka. And so bureaucracies have to be vertical and inertial, and we just have to be, again, fixing. So by putting that idea of agency, design thinking, creative bureaucracies, the entrepreneurial state, but especially entrepreneurial ecosystems, right? We bring that excitement not just to the MBA, but to the MPA. And there's a reason that we thought about not doing an MPP, but an MPA is due to that point of agency, the tools, the instruments, the new partnerships. This is really about how to administer and govern a different form of capitalism. So we're quite proud it's an MPA, not an MPP, for the same reason that, again, MBAs put so much attention to the administrative side, because the tools need to change. The tools out there are not fit for purpose.
We had a nice question that maybe we'll pick up on a little bit more, but one question was about opportunities to learn and think about sustainability and climate in the MPA. But maybe, Mariana, you could speak a little bit to the work of the Institute in those areas, and what we're doing. You already mentioned COP, so maybe elaborate a little bit more.
Sure. So first of all, we much prefer the word sustainability or the ecological transition instead of just thinking, for example, about green or energy, which tends to go down the silo, both in terms of governance and departments of energy or sectors in terms of renewable energy. So in the same way that, going to the moon and back in a short amount of time, which I wrote about in Mission Economy, required that complete rethink of, how would the astronauts eat? How would they go to the bathroom? What would they be wearing? All those solutions that had to happen along the way required so much innovation, collaboration. But again, the state itself really helped to direct that. But the innovation came from the private sector in a bottom-up way. So we say the same thing for climate change, for biodiversity loss. We really need to think about this in terms of what we're eating, what we're wearing, how we're moving. And we encourage governments when they're interested in sustainability, which we hope they all are, and almost all our projects have to do with sustainability, to really think through in that intersectoral way, always though coming back to how do you crowd in as much bottom-up innovation from all these different sectors in the private sector, but towards mission accomplished. So again, the workshop we're doing today for the UK government, literally in half an hour, is with the ministry called DESNES, which is for net zero, but we're encouraging them to go beyond the idea that it's just about the energy transformation. In Barbados, again, some work we did, which also required a narrative shift, was to not talk about the island as a small island state, but a large ocean state. And some of the most interesting stuff they were doing was thinking of from the roofs to the reefs, right? So the reefs in terms of that loss of critical nature inside the ocean, but the roofs, the housing, right? The housing and the social housing policies. And what's that connection between social housing and the ecological transformation? That's also something we've brought, for example, to the work in Barcelona, a city, as you know, in Spain, where we worked with the city government on their housing priorities, but always, again, in that intersectoral way and bringing the idea of sustainability and accessibility, but also the idea of cultural adequacy, bringing a human rights approach in some ways to a housing mission. But the sustainability side, which has to do with, literally how we rebuild bottom up, our form of capitalism, it also requires a massive change in the financing. And Josh Ryan Collins and his team, he has a growing team due to some large new grants he just got, is also thinking about what it means for central banks. Our work has also looked at what it means for public banks. You know, for example, the conditionality that's required from a public bank to the private sector to make sure it's moving in a green direction. And we looked at where that worked, where it hasn't worked. So we try to bring this idea of sustainability kind of across the board to almost everything we do, because that's about directionality.
Do you have time for more questions, or
Yeah,
do you need
I
to
do.
jump off?
No, I do.
Okay, let me just look. I've been answering questions in the background. Let me see if there's another good one that's come up. We had one question about, let's see, I'll answer that one. Ooh, okay, Mariana, this is a good sort of theory question for you. So, how would you say the interplay between internalized and externalized incentives shape public perceptions of value? So, thinking about incentives and value. Um, if you'd like to speak to that a little bit. And then we also have a question about, let's see. Yeah, let's start there. So a little bit more about value and incentives, maybe speaking some of your work on conditionalities.
Yeah, I mean, this could be answered in different ways. It sort of depends what
Yeah.
the person means in terms of value. But first of all, I did write a whole book about this called The Value of Everything, Making and Taking in the Global Economy. And the first thing is that when we don't really talk about the difference between value creation and value extraction, we end up with a huge problem, which I argue in the book is a current problem, which is we confuse profits with rents. And it's very interesting to go back to the classical economists, so Adam Smith, David Ricardo, Karl Marx, but also the early economists, the physiocrats back in the 1700s, where they put a lot of emphasis on that difference. The physiocrats, they created what I call the first spreadsheet ever back in the 1700s. They called it the tableau économique, where they plotted the value that they thought was being created by the farmers, because you can imagine in those years it was still an agricultural economy. But then they worried through this table where they plotted out where the value was going, whether it was then getting wasted and sucked out of the system due to the activity of the landlords, who they called the sterile class. So it's very interesting also, they use biological metaphors, whereas modern economics is using a lot of metaphors from Newtonian physics, right? Like the center of gravity, the average agents, unique equilibria. So these biological metaphors about a system that can have, you know, certain types of ecosystems, parasitic or symbiotic, but also a system that doesn't reproduce itself because value is being sucked out, whether it's through the landlords at the time, or today one could argue through the financial sector, or fast forward the work of myself, but also Cecilia Recap, looking at how modern algorithms, how they're designed, are increasingly about extracting rents out of the system. Shoshana Zuboff's written a great book. She says, you think you're searching Google for free? Well, Google is searching you for free. Anyway, that distinction between value creation and value extraction requires an underlying theory of value. And it's not that one has the right theory and someone else has the wrong theory, but even talking about value explicitly then forces one to ask all sorts of other questions. And I think what you were also getting at was, if we talk about collective value creation, how do we get the right incentives in the system to also, you know, produce and to create value, instead of maybe just a free ride, or to also create the wrong kinds of value, right? In terms of the taxation system, how it can help steer a system. And those are all questions, I mean, to make a long story short, that we address in the MPA. But also something I really learned a lot from in Barbados, again, was in a country that had such a long legacy of slavery. The prime minister said that when she goes into schools and young people like look down and, you know, say, hello, prime minister, she says, look at me, you have value, right? So how to bring dignity, value, self-worth back to the center of how we engage with citizens was also a key feature in the Camden work, where some of the work we did on the green economy was also transforming food banks, which were giving food out for free, into food cooperatives and green food cooperatives. So the people who are benefiting from a system also are at the center of the governance of the system and having a sense of ownership. And that's about recognizing them as value creators instead of just distributing value to others. So these are all very nuanced questions, but are critical for not just, talking again but working with people around what it means to create a more inclusive economy.
I want to transition to some of the nuts and bolts and technical questions that are tied to the MPA. But any final encouragement or thoughts before we switch over to that part of the presentation?
From me, just
Yeah.
I hope you all apply. It's my favorite bit of the Institute is the students. I think that's also a testament to the great faculty we have, the great work that attracts people, but there's nothing that gives me more joy than meeting the students, but also, of course, teaching, but
Mhm.
perhaps also seeing that feedback that I talked about in the beginning
Yeah.
between theory and practice, and seeing the learning that comes from that. And we learned from you. I'll just finish
Yeah.
with that. We have learned so much from our students. You bring different perspectives from around the world. The students end up being very tight knit. It's amazing the friendships that are forged, but also you become our friends as well because you're working with us. And it's you bond when you're struggling together, and we're all struggling to make this world, I would argue, a better place, hopefully, for everybody. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mariana. Really appreciate you coming on and giving this sort of mini seminar to everyone who's joined. And
Thank
you know,
you.
if they learn nothing else, I think it's to hear sort of the passion that you hold for this work, and also just how busy and how many different places we're working, and how many different, hands, different pots we've got on the boil, whatever the right metaphor is. So thank you so much, Mariana. Really
Thank you
appreciate
so
your
much.
time.
And,
Yeah.
and thank you to all the students that came today. Bye-bye.
So as Mariana steps off, what we'll do is I'll go through some of the sort of basics of the MPA, because I know some of you have sort of more technical or nuts and bolts questions. And for those of you who've joined just a little bit late, I'm Dr. Kate Roll. I'm an associate professor at IIPP, and I lead up the teaching team here. So I'll go through some of that. Hopefully that'll address your some questions. Carolina will speak a little bit about our students, and then hopefully there should be still a good amount of time to pick up both some of these sort of deeper, chunkier questions that are coming through the Q&A, and also some of the more straightforward technical questions. Good. So I'm going to go back into the slides, and we'll go from there. Okay. So the MPA is designed to sort of move beyond the standard MPA. We do things a little bit differently at IIPP, and we encourage you to challenge basic economic thinking, to ask where change comes from, to harness tools of design, to do things that maybe you wouldn't get elsewhere, which I think speaks to some of these sort of radicalism and energy that you hopefully got from Mariana. The course runs over 1 year. It's a 1-year MPA, and it unfolds over 3 terms. And the terms move from more theory heavy, the sort of ideas that we think you need to have and ideas we think you need to be able to challenge, towards a more applied side. And so where you sort of end your MPA journey with either writing a really nice dissertation or getting involved in a placement, which I'll say a little bit more about later. But in the first term, you take 4 core modules with us: New Economic Thinking and Public Value, led by Carolina; Economics of Innovation and Public Purpose, led by Dr. Cecilia Recap; Power, Politics, and Systems Change, that I lead; and then Making Decisions, Evidence and Evaluation, which is led by David Eves. There's a nice question in the chat that came in around digital transformation, and ADHAR and a few other programs. And David's a sort of a world-leading expert in that, and he teaches on that in the first term, and then also in the second term a little bit. In the second term, you get to choose what are called optional modules, and these can be from across UCL. So if there's something that you're really passionate about, whether it be spatial analytics, whether it be transportation policy, whether it be political philosophy, this is where you get to focus and specialize. And then we also have in the second term 2 more core modules: Transformation by Design, and then Creative Bureaucracies, led by Rainer Kettel, which is thinking about how do you build organizations that can do all these things that we want them to be able to do. And then, like I said, in term 3, moving to the dissertation or the placement. To help you navigate, because saying you could pick anything from across all of UCL can be a little bit overwhelming. So we've set up what we call pathways. This means that when you join us, you can say, my focus is really on public administration, or maybe it's on economic policy, or maybe it's on digital. And then within these pathways, we help you make decisions about what your optional modules, what you might want to pursue there, what placement you might want to do, or what type of topic you might want to work in your dissertation. But we really see these pathways as help for you navigating the big course catalog and being able to help tell a story about what you've learned during your MPA when you exit. So saying, I did an MPA with a specialism, with a strength in digital transformation, for example, we think can be really powerful. Here's an example of some of the optional modules that you might take if you were in that digital transformation pathway. So you'd have the option of doing digital transformation with David, again, this world-leading expert, but you could also be looking at gender, social movements, and digital activism, which sounds absolutely wonderful. I want to take all of these, or digital health, right? So really interesting stuff that draw on these strengths of UCL as one of these, we're a global top 10 university, and we've got the courses to back that up. I said I'd say a little bit more about placements, and this is another thing that's really distinctive about the MPA at IIPP. This really isn't done in many other programs, at least not in the UK. In the final term, we have the option for you to work with a public sector organization that has applied to work with us. We always have a few dozen organizations who want to work with our students. Our students then select the briefs that are most interesting to them, and then they work with these organizations in a really interesting way. Sometimes they're drawn from our mission-oriented innovation network. And these projects have ranged from taking big COVID era data sets and drawing insights from them and reflecting them back to a council, to helping think about big picture strategy for an EU cancer mission. So they're really diverse in their focus and in the type of work, but it's all applied and all sort of hopefully pulls together some of what you've learned during the MPA and allows you to sort of build your portfolio going forward. Here's a few example of the organizations we've worked with. You can see not just UK based, but from all over, and all reflecting IIPP's perspective, with a real interest in innovation. That's really important. I'll say a couple words about our faculty before handing over to Carolina to talk about our students. So this is our core faculty team. In addition, we have got Rowan Conway, who's not pictured here, who also teaches on the design. We have our director, Mariana Mazzucato, who you just met. Rainer Cattell and David Eves are our deputy directors. And then we've got this great suite of economists, philosophers, labor leaders, a really good mix because we're a cross-disciplinary department. We also draw from a really wide range of experts, both from industry or practice and from academia. So we are able to sort of have both these thought leaders and then also these people who've done incredible work. Mike Bracken, you see, is featured here, who is really well known for setting up the UK Government Digital Services, which is sort of world known for really improving the interface for citizens when they're accessing the UK services online. So a really interesting set of people from all over the world and with a set of really interesting expertise. Carolina, over to you to speak about our students.
Thank you, Kate. I think I'm just you can just keep sharing it and I just follow you change according to what I'm saying. So hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. And it's always exciting actually to be in this kind of open day. I feel like I should have taken this master's. Oh, well, a while ago. So yes, our students, I follow from what Mariana said, which is so true. We learn so much with our students and they're so different from the type of students I have come across in the UK. I have taught at SOAS, at City of London, and then Cambridge before joining IPP. And what makes our students very special is that, first of all, they have some kind of practical background. Of course, we get students straight from undergrad, if that's the case, but very often we prioritize students that have from 5 to 10 years experience. Kate, you can correct me, but that's how I understand. And what happens, what that means for us is that the students have a very good knowledge of, let's say, the real world and what they want and why they are at IPP. But at the same time, the reason why they are at IPP is because they want to change things and they want to understand what's happening around the world a little bit better, considering that some of them, or I would say most of them, have been involved with NGOs, with think tanks, with civil service. So they've been trying to do, let's say, I could summarize my experience at IPP, coming across with students that are trying to make changes and they kind of keep hitting the wall. And they come to IPP almost like looking for answers, like why this is not, why I haven't been successful in my attempt to make things better for society. So it's very challenging for someone like me, and I would say most of my colleagues at IPP that have just a straightforward experience in academia, to come across these students with very real world challenges, asking us very practical and mundane questions. So I've been learning a lot with these students. But yeah, they are very diverse in that sense, in coming from different, let's say, practical background. But I would say the commonality is this attempt to understand how we organize in the world right now and what is wrong with society. So yeah, this I would say is the most important thing at IPP from my perspective as a someone teaching them new economic thinking. But is another aspect that's quite important is having students from literally around the globe, and that is not just to like a propaganda, like we're very diverse. Actually, London is actually very diverse, and you get all universities in London, in UK, they have students from around the globe, but very often you have regions that are more prominent. And IPP, that happens a little bit, but not much. We have is a very diverse group from Latin America, from Asia, from Africa, from the UK. And initially, when you start seeing these students, you feel like, wow, this is very different, it's very diverse. But at the same time, as I mentioned before, they come at IPP in a way for very similar reasons. And that has to do with, I don't know if it was Kate or Mariana that mentioned before, why they become such a tight group. I remember, I think in my second year at IPP, a American student saying, "Oh, I'm going to organize a Thanksgiving dinner in my place." I said, "Oh, how many people are going?" It's like, "Oh, the entire MPA cohort." I said, "I'm sorry." But that is the level of how they get connected, which is amazing network. They support each other. Most of them keep in touch, which is also very interesting. But you can see here in that slide, the regions that we get students from. Of course, this also follows, and Kate, you can step in, but that also follows our policy work. It's very interesting to see that depending on where IPP work on a year before is really focused, then we start getting more students from that region as well, which is quite interesting. And then Latin America, of course, we get IPP doing work in Brazil, in Chile, in Bolivia. So this is very interesting. And you can see on the other side, which is quite important, something I mentioned before, they also very diverse in terms of the professional background. You have NGOs, private sector, civil service. We do get students, right, that are coming straight from undergrad, but we also have political appointees and so on. The green one is, yeah, the political appointee, sorry, yeah. So this is, my experience at IPP with the teaching and the vibrant and rich environment because of that background the students have is amazing. It's something I've never come across. Next, thank you, Kate. Yeah, that's actually quite important. Where our students go after that. I think one thing I should have mentioned before is that some of the students we get as well, they are really in that point in their career that, as I said, they're hitting the wall. What I'm going to do next, and some of them really want to change career as well, and I see that happens a lot. They are successful in doing this, right? And go and work in policy or work as a consultant, or even going back to the civil service they were before, but with a very different approach to it. And you have 3 examples here, fantastic examples. Farah from Pakistan, who then returned. Well, she was already working with Deputy Commissioner IRS and Taxation, and then of course she returned to that post, as I mentioned before, but with a totally different mindset. And even the understanding of economics, right? Because that our MPA has that aspect, which Mariana has already mentioned, which is very different. And I know Kate's mentioned, at least in the UK, but I would probably say I would push for, like, more globally, being the only MPA who will really go down to challenge economic concepts and challenge how the state is dealing with these economic concepts. So yeah, so you have Billy from the UK, consultant background, now building a youth environment service based in his MPA thesis. Also very interesting. And of course, Nick from Chile, who is now working innovation team at the UK Digital Catapult. We have contact with that organization as well, don't we, Kate? Yeah, this is another thing that happens a lot of IPP, which I liked very much, because the master goes so fast. It's a year, and we get very close to the students, and some of them stay around in London, or they stay with our partners, or they stay at IPP, as Mariana mentioned before. So we keep coming across them constantly after the MPA, and it's interesting to compare how they got at MPA, and like, I want to change things, what's happening, and then you meet them in positions such as Nico, and you can see it's like, it's happening. I actually just recently I met one of our students, Fabian, from last year or 2 years before, who now is working a well-being trust funding and also trust organization, also extremely happy. So yeah, so this is very rewarding for us. And that's why I agree with Mariana. The students are definitely one of the best part of IPP. And I think there's, yeah, the post-career, maybe I mentioned a little bit about that, but yeah, we can go I'm just in more details. I think Mariana covered a little bit about this, right? But I think IPP and our MPA is really making history in terms of being very unique. The focus on mission, rethinking the state, innovation. Quite honestly, if you're doing economics, or if you're not doing economics, is very unlikely that you're going to come across, at least at the realm of policy, to have a module on innovation, innovation of economics, and then linking with policy. So this is very unique. And also the new economic thinking, which we have a particular a module on that, where we discuss in much more detail the state, the market, and of course public value. So this is very unique. And of course the connection was something I mentioned before, because of that kind of the common aspect all the MPA students they have. Actually the network, the alumni, and even the contact between this network, the alumni with our partner organizations, is quite strong, and they stay with our students for a very long time. And of course, UCL itself has support as well to help with careers. But I guess, yeah, I think IPP or MPA is a place where you can definitely say that most of our students find their way around somehow our network and so on. Yeah, I think, is there something else I haven't covered, Kate, that you want? Oh yeah, of course, you have Rachel. I'm gonna read that together. I think this quote is so lovely, so I'm just gonna read together with all of you. Is from Rachel Bentley, and is yeah, amazing. Let's read together. So going back to academia after nearly 20 years in the private sector was quite daunting, but the IPP MPA program has been exactly what I wanted. challenging, stimulating, and of course, educational. Most of all, it's given me a sense of optimism that collectively we can fix our grand challenges. And if we harness our cross-sectorial strength effectively, So yeah, so I think one point, so sorry, Kate, just one more point on this, because it came to my mind and I haven't highlighted enough perhaps, is that our students in their first term, they are quite concerned that they haven't been in academia for a very long time. And so they come full of energy, in a sense that be frustrated what they are doing before. So they want, they want to, of course, understand the economy better, understand how the policy works, why things are not they not have been able to achieve what they want. But at the same time, they get one thing we do at IPP, which is also quite different from the other MPA, is the focus on economics, as I mentioned before, and other kind of more theoretical, even the system thinking. We also go through some, let's say, heavy thinking within that field as well. And most of them are a little bit, oh, I'm not sure, I have to write essay, so many readings, but they manage exactly because is related to what they want. It's not something in abstract. So when you're making this effort, we see from the students, initially they are very concerned about that, but because they are learning, because it actually makes sense, because they have that passion, it goes, let's say, after a little bit of complaint, right, Kate? It goes very well. And so yeah, if this is a concern any of you have here about being away from academia for a very long time and going back, I want to tell you two things. First of all, at IPP, you're going to meet many students in the same situation, and you have support from each other. But also, we are very much aware of that. And the program is somehow designed to support you. The program is not to catch you out, right? It's to support you. So that will not be a problem. And I think that's it from me, Kate. I don't know if you want to add something.
No, it's super. I've been listening and also answering questions in the chat. And you've covered quite a few of them, including just this reflection on students joining. Okay, I'm going to do just a couple more slides just to make sure that we've got a bit of time left for Q&A at the end. So next steps. All the information on applying can be found on our website, and then there's a email address here. Although I'll actually put into the chat my personal email. I'm really happy to answer questions directly on anything we've spoken about